Okay. Okay. Can people see my screen? Okay, great. Just give it a sec. Sorry, I'm trying to get my headphones on. Okay, can people hear me now? Okay, cool. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Today is the 35th of a SIP call. Yeah, today we're very lucky to have Juliet on again to talk about her stacks code of conduct. So yeah, let's get into it. So if there's anybody new, just let me have a quick look. Let's see. Okay, we might have some first timer. So yeah, I'll go through a little bit what we're here for, what this code is about. So this code is all about SIPs. SIP stands for Stacks Improvement Proposal. This is how we incorporate the blockchain level consensus breaking or standard creating standards such as SIP9 and SIP10 tokens, and important SIPs like SIP12, which is Stacks 2.05, and the new one Stacks 2.1, which is SIP15. All this stuff are critical because they help to make stacks really improve from a fundamental level. Yeah, so here for this call is all about like sharing your ideas and talking out loud with people and educate the community what these sort of behind the scenes stuff going on GitHub, which the average user don't get to see every day, is all about. And here, if you have any idea, we're trying to make that process easier. Therefore, you can come and share, and we can help you shape that idea as well. So I try to invite the relevant people onto the call, and we can have a productive conversation and see how we can take the idea forward. Yeah, so, and in this call, I also give everybody a bit of quick update of what everything is in the pipeline. So this is sort of the overview of what everything is at. So we have lots of early ideas at the draft stage or pre-draft stage, shall we say. But we also have lots of ideas or lots of SIPs later down the pipeline, basically just waiting to be ratified. And in order to be fully ratified, you gotta meet certain criteria. And basically the last criteria for most of these things are just have to meet the Stacks 2.1 block height that's being selected, which is sometimes in March, later on in March. So as long that date is here, all these will be ratified. There is one that's a little bit dependent on how many people adopt the metadata update. So we need a couple of more guys to adopt that metadata indexer. So yeah, so that one also trying to speak to different people. I'll help Rafael to speak to different people, see if they want to adopt it. But yeah, and then lots of early ideas, which I will select a few to talk about. But in terms of the sort of the big SIP, the Stacks 2.1 is going live end of March, around 22nd of March, I believe. So at a block height, a Bitcoin block height, not Stacks block height. So yeah, so that's a really critical one. And this one, I feel like it's also kind of important to sort of highlight, because now I'd like to sort of, after our discussion a couple of weeks ago, I think we all kind of realized that this is bigger than Stacks itself. It's not just about Stack standard anymore, because there are some standard that we need to have for ordinals, and that's gonna need wider ordinals communities input. So if you have any input on that, or if you want to become part of the conversation, please let me know and let others know, such as people at Hero like Kieran or Janik or Mark. Yeah, so and if there's anything you want to participate in the discussion, there's a channel that Janik created. It's under development channel. So here all the builders, wallet providers can come and have their input into this specific SIP discussion. So yeah, and another one I just want to highlight because Igor from Trust Machine has mentioned that this specific SIP is necessary building blocks for SBTC, which means we got to get it basically reviewed and ratified, hopefully by May. I think we can do that. So this, the SIP editor committee, which I'm later on having a meeting with them on public, on Twitter Space, we're going to be talking about how to get this SIP developed further. I believe we're missing like a couple of devs on that. But yeah, I will be utilizing the SIP editors committee to try and figure out how to get it to the next step for the bigger picture, which is SBTC. But yeah, that's another one. And today we're going to be talking about Juliet's Stacks Code of Conduct. That's been, we've had several previous sort of input, whether it's on GitHub, whether it's on Twitter, but now we just really want to consolidate everything and trying to get it into a final draft to be reviewed, because I think it's had sort of enough, or maybe after today, hopefully, if people feel it will be have enough input, then I think it's probably ready to be reviewed. Yeah, so another one that I saw on Stacks forum, which I also want to highlight, it's a request for comment from Jude himself about the L1 speed improvement. And there's another topic in the actual thread as well. But I guess the critical one sort of, or the one that user might feel the impact the most is probably the micro blocks, the in-between blocks improvement. Therefore, this, I think Jude is saying that it's building up to a SIP, or you will build up to a SIP in the future.
That's right.
Yep. So I think getting these early feedback from the community will be really great. So yeah, I'll be sort of help highlighting this to the greater community. So if anybody got any input, please go to Stacks forum and put your thoughts down. Cool. So yeah, so I will leave the floor open a little bit before I get into the Juliet's discussion. Actually, maybe I'll get into Juliet's topic, and then we'll circle back to the open floor, if that's okay. So I shall give the floor to Juliet.
Hi there. This is Juliet, and I did my first presentation in December, on December 9th, on the Code of Conduct and the SIP for the Code of Conduct. So today is really just a quick update on what's been happening. I'm the author of the Code of Conduct. I've dropped some links in the chat. There's one link that's from the StacksGov PM. That's where the requests for comments have been going, and there's been a lot of conversation there. So take a quick look at that. I just created in my own personal repo a revised draft of the Code of Conduct, and I think that's where I'm going to also put the SIP, the draft of the SIP. I've been working on that. There's been lots of discussion with the community about some of the different issues within the Code of Conduct. We had a Twitter poll regarding in January on Can't Be Evil, and some discussion about that and whether that was still relevant to the community, because that's one of the parts that's included within the code of conduct on the initial area. And we also had some conversation about a number of topics, including bug bounties, responsible disclosure, leaders and moderators, what that means, how that's defined, and intellectual honesty and conflict resolution. So all of these things are being incorporated into the draft SIP as well as the code of conduct. And then the goal is to have the draft SIP up by the end of this month. And most likely at the rate that we're moving, it will probably be before the end of the month. And then it will go to the SIP editors for review. So super excited to see that happen. And just some background, this code of conduct, if you don't know, was the result of a grant back in 2021. It's been on GitHub gathering, the RFC has been gathering comments since then. And there's been, since the beginning of this year, there's been more discussion amongst community members about different topics. So one of the ones that I highlighted was the leaders and moderators. I think this is probably something that we need to flesh out a little bit, just maybe a one line or two. We have a couple of lines that are going to be going in about responsible disclosure and intellectual honesty, also about conflict resolution. So if there is a violation of the code of conduct, there is an enforcement section in the draft codes of conduct. You can take a look at that. And that's about it. So the conflict resolution steps in after there's been an enforcement issue, or after someone has indicated to a moderator or a community leader that there is a violation of the code of conduct. Now, CM3s and other moderators all routinely get rid of spam and things like that in the Discord. So this is something I think that another thing that needs to be brought to the moderators about, is that something that they want to do when it comes to the code of conduct? Do they want to be the person who is the enforcer? So these are all conversations to be had between now and the end of the month. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, please jump over to the request for comments on the Stacks.gov GitHub and put some of your comments or thoughts there. And I think that's about it for me. Any questions? I think we're open for questions, or our hero will open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, please do unmute your mic if you have any question. I think Ms. Steve is a moderator in Blog Survey or a few other Discords. I don't know if Ms. Steve, welcome to SIPCO. If you got any thoughts about having a code of conduct for the sort of the Stacks wider community. Yeah, what do you think about stating some of our ethos, some of our beliefs? Do we go as far as talking about enforcement, or is it not necessary? I think it's there's a chance to debate.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, so I think so that enforcing would be going too far with this. I think we should maintain a good balance within the community. So to not show as if we're like enforcing or being too difficult on the community members, because that's going to push people away. I would say that we should keep a good balance, and we should have experienced moderators to enforce these laws and rules, and so that the community members can abide by them. But I don't support literally enforcing them in a very harsh manner. So just keep it moderate, and so that we don't drive people away, rather bring people in to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think this was also one of I put a couple of comments I had when I advertised about this SIP in public on Twitter. There has been a couple of comments about promoting censorship. We are not trying to do that. I think that's not the goal. But I guess
Yeah.
through the delivery, it can be interpreted as such. And somebody else said controlling behavior, actions, consequences. I think the original draft does go in more in detail about the enforcement, but through the times that this SIP has been brought up, my personal feeling is also that rather than talking about enforcement, maybe should we just not talk about what examples are the bad behavior, what are enforcement, rather
Exactly.
keeping it much more like what are the good behaviors maybe, and highlighting the good ethos, the good behaviors, and
Yeah,
maybe
I totally agree.
that might suffice.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, and we know in general what kind of behavior are bad. And we
Yep.
kind of know just through our social interaction that we know how to deal with them. And we haven't
Definitely.
had too much problems so far through our
Mm-hmm.
social layer, so to speak, to deal with those
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
Rather than stating them down on paper, exactly what happens when something happens and how to deal with the punishment or
Mm-hmm.
enforcing, I
Yeah.
think currently not just from one person but a few other from the community seems to have commented on those sort of statements in a code of
Mm-hmm.
conduct might be a little bit just too much, but I like
Yeah.
to hear more people's take on it.
Yeah.
Brad, do you have any thoughts? Benaya, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to add a quick comment. I'm also thinking along the lines of what Mischief mentioned, as in terms of I think enforcing anything that would come out of this SIP would be like very difficult, and I think undesirable from the larger ecosystem. That's my personal opinion. So I think this can act as a guiding kind of principle at the high level. And then community members, as they come in and out, they can choose to decide to embrace what part of it they want to promote, and then if certain things they don't like, that they can choose not to interact in that manner. So I think having this as a document that acts as a guiding principle for the community to push forward would be, I think, a good approach in this regard.
So maybe I'll highlight a couple of things that I'm more familiar with that I had inputted recently, was to do with reporting bugs. It's just I suggest perhaps just suggest people, if they find bugs, they can help report it maybe through programs such as Immunify. That could be a good, code of conduct. And another one was voting in terms of if there's anything critical that we perhaps, like if there's some controversial topic that we need to make a decision on in moderation, how do we come to an agreement? and whether by voting having moderators vote on a specific topic, and it has to be over 80%, i.e. the same threshold as stacks 2.1 to get any major decision through. I don't know what you guys think about whether that's a necessary sort of additional little suggestions for coming to a agreement. Should there be any controversial any key decisions to be made? Anybody? Like probably it's more to do with moderations. If there were community leaders as suggested, and if they need to agree on something, then there would be some sort of voting mechanism, not too indifferent to consideration advisory boards voting method.
Here, I think there's a message on the chat about dealing with things first inside the teams.
Yeah. Sting, if you want to unmute, feel free. Or if you can't.
Hey guys, yeah, I just wanted to kind of chime in, and I kind of agree with trying to make sure that the code of conduct it's kind of more of like guidance and guidelines versus anything that's particularly enforced. And I think it would be good to kind of take almost a similar model to having things be more lightly controlled the broader area it is. So like for stacks as a whole, it's a very loose guidelines, but then if you like go on Discord and like the stacks Discord channels, that's where you maybe have their own particular code of conducts that are kind of stated and followed there, that actually do kind of dictate when someone's maybe removed or things like that. And then same for like the forums and other discussions on issues. And then as far as voting, I think that kind of more depends on is it something that's actually a technical matter where we're voting on a change or how to address like an issue, or if it's just something that's more about how we all interact with each other.
Yeah, I think I see your point. Maybe that makes me to think maybe then we don't need to have those specific voting stuff. Maybe that's leaving up to individual sub-community to come to term how they agree on something. But yeah, appreciate your input. But maybe we can make a suggestion that it's not just over 50% on general. Maybe try to get, suggest to try to get higher majority sort of threshold. Or do you think it's not even needed because the sub community will come to their own sort of customization of how they want to come to a consensus on different stuff?
Are we talking about the issues itself as if there's a violation of the code of conduct? I think that one thing that needs to be clarified is discussion with the moderators about these issues as well, and bringing the code of conduct to them and seeing what their position is about these particular, how it's set up, whether there should be enforcement. What do you think?
I personally don't. I I keep feeling from other people's comments that the more we have anything to do with enforcement in the code of conduct, the more people will, maybe misinterpret, or, maybe will just lead people to thinking like this is, could evolve to become more and more censorship. That's my feeling. I don't know about other people.
I don't think it's really possible to censor people. I mean, if you like, there's plenty of Stacks venues, and there's no limit on the number of venues that can be created online.
But yeah, I think that's clear. It's really hard to censor. But what I mean is, then is it necessary to have any statements relating to enforcement on the actual code of conduct? Because many reasons.
Yeah, I think there is. It's not enough to just, in some cases, I'm not saying like, this is even the normal case, but in some extreme cases, it's not enough to just walk away, because, the people who are bothering you in whatever way, shape, or form can continue to coordinate actions against you in Stacks controlled spaces, even if you're not there. It's like just signing off is not enough to stop the Twitter mob to come after you, because they still know where you live and they'll still dox you, things like that. I'm not saying things get that hairy or extreme all the time. What I am saying is that the code of conduct is less about, this punitive, we're going to come out to get you for misinterpreting what you said kind of flex. I don't think anyone wants that. I think this is more about like our Stacks controlled spaces being put to use in being as open and welcoming to everyone as possible. And if they're not, then how might we identify cases where they're not and go about fixing that?
How would we define like or what would we define as Stacks controlled spaces in this instance? Would it just be like, Stacks forum, Discord, some of the kind of official places of conversation, maybe GitHub?
Yeah, exactly. This also includes like offline too, like at Stacks conferences, for example, or Stacks meetups.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm wondering if I just keep feeling like would we be able to have specific documents kind of catered to those platforms, in GitHub, as a code of conduct on major repos, or maybe kind of rules in the Stacks forum and so forth, because I feel like they'll all have their own tailored kind of policies that would make sense for each forum.
They kind
like
of already do.
Yeah, right. But that almost makes me wonder, should we cover those topics in something like a SIP, because that's so broad, versus those Stacks controlled spaces are so specific?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily in conflict, though. What the SIP could do is, devolve some of its prescriptions to area specific codes of conduct. Like obviously a code of conduct for like a Stacks conference is going to say different things or emphasize certain behavioral norms that are different from like an online space, for example, because the ways by which we interact through the medium of the internet are fundamentally different than interacting in person.
Yep.
Yeah, so we almost kind of have to sort of, if we want to have anything, then it will be like a top level reinforcement guideline, but then it's not really customized to each space. Therefore, it would almost say like each forum will need its own tailored version of the code of conduct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Juliet, but it's my understanding that this code of conduct is meant to be like, this is like the bare minimum of what we expect in Stacker areas. And then if, other venues or specific instances where we all get together happen to have, more refined ideas, that would supersede it. Is that what you were going for?
Yeah, there's also a code of conduct that's already in existence for in real life events that through the Stacks Foundation for any of those events. So that's a different thing, and that has similar terms, but some differences. This really, I think when originally this was created, we didn't have as large as a community as we have now. And the idea was really probably for those areas like the Discord and other Stacks controlled areas. Then the idea being something that I've thought about recently is that it's when you're talking about further parts of the community, different organizations, they can adopt it or they can create their own. So I think it's really limited to things that are the identified spaces. I also would like to refer to the article that I wrote that's really talks about some of what the code of conduct can do, and which is all about creating a positive and an inclusive environment, and then promoting fairness and accountability. And I think one of the key ones that really, for me personally, is encouraging people to share their ideas in a respectful environment. And so, and then I conclude in that is that adopting that a code of conduct helps all people to feel welcome. And it's the whole idea is really creating a friendly, welcome environment where people can have positive or meaningful discourse. And sometimes discourse gets heated when people are on different sides of the conversation. But that's not necessarily something that's not problematic. That's a good thing to have people come together and discuss. So any thoughts on that? Did that help?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
I feel so far there's not a lot of debates about the positive stuff and what should be highlighted. It's more surrounds the almost like the quote unquote negative side of things. Yeah. So I think no matter what ethos or positive reinforcement we want, what sort of good behaviors are examples and how we want to be inclusive and respectful with each other. I think all these things are really positive, and I think nobody has anything to say really. It's just more debatable on the reinforcement side.
I know that I think one of the first comments that was on the RFC when it was put up was that we're all adults and we all know what good and bad behavior is. But it does help. I think in my experience, it helps to have like a guidelines, like people play freer or children, there's scientific articles about children in playgrounds and they play freer when there's boundaries. And same thing with contracts with people. When there's boundaries, people know what their duty is, what they're supposed to do. But that, the enforcement part is not as important as what the agreement is between people and how we want to work and play together. And I have one other thought about the enforcement. Moderators regularly kick people, but we know that that's usually like the spam postings and that type of thing, or the bots and all of that. So, those things happen already. Any thoughts about that?
So from my point of view, we're kind of a neighborhood of people right now that have not signed off on like a HOA on how we're going to act in the future. I'm just concerned, even with good intentions, we sign up for this HOA and 5 years from now, someone's yelling at me trying to make sure I bring my trash can up from the street. I just, enforcement mechanisms and everything, it's a giant worry. And I don't feel like it's a very kind of Satoshi way of building things. So, with all good intentions, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's my concern.
I liked that homeowner example.
Yeah, literally me right now. I get yelled at by the HOA president. Like, dude, why's trash can still on the side of the road?
Yeah, it's funny because this one I'm getting lots of comments on Twitter. Yeah, and people just generally seem to not want to prescribe certain ideas. But I understand the purpose why it was came up and why we're talking about it and why we still discussing trying to perhaps have it. But yeah, I do want to just highlight another question in the chat. Do artists have to accept the code of conduct like Yuga Labs comes to Stacks? Like, do they have to care about it? Do they have to say, yes, I subscribe to this? There, before you subscribe, you cannot. Well, I'm definitely sure like you can launch it without subscribing it, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Juliet.
Sorry, I was
When
looking
big-
at something in the chat. What was that? I
Yeah, do artists or big companies, when they come to Stacks, do they have to accept the code of conduct? Like, for example, the Yuga Labs comes to Stack. Yeah, do they have to make any reference to it, or yeah,
No.
that was a question.
I would say no. There's no ticking boxes. It's basically an overall. This is how we play here, and this is what we. These are the things that we want to see. I think there was a question about is there a reward for positive behavior? There is a language in there that talks about if somebody is really lighting up the community and supporting people, that's something that should be highlighted in the community. Someone who's the superstar that's helping everyone and takes their own time to contribute and to support things and to support others, so that those things should be raised up to light, because we do care about contributors and supporting each other. So I know that enforcement is generally a part of code of conducts. So it's good to have these conversations, and this is something that we've seen in the last, at least I've seen in the last year, is there's definitely a negative perception of any kind of enforcement, and that's come up repeatedly. I've seen it not just about this code of conduct, but also about other situations in the community where there's a negative feeling of trying to tell people how to behave. I mean, we can, I think, and it sounds to me that what people are saying today in this call is that, yes, we want to, it's good to have the high level, this is what we want to see in the community, but the enforcement part is leaving people with a bad taste, I think.
Just to elaborate on what you just said there, Julia, I think it's kind of a bad faith framing to think that code of conducts can force you to behave a certain way. They can't. Like, you do you. A code of conduct is more about trying to delineate, the means by which we resolve interpersonal conflicts, which can happen at scale, and that's just human nature. The alternative to not having a de facto way of resolving conflicts is that we invent our own, and that can be worse. Like, that can mean, like, if you say something the admin doesn't you just get the ban hammer right away, as opposed to having a way to talk about it or get people to cool down. Like, having the known means of resolving conflict, should it ever arise, should overall make it less stressful for people to interact with each other, as long as the code of conduct is applied evenly and fairly, which I believe that's the intention here. But by no means, like, can it control or change people's behavior. And that's not even what the code of conduct is trying to do. If you want to in Juliet Labs cases, create references to the SS, like the blockchain can't stop you from doing that. But if you want to come into our chat and start promoting Nazi paraphernalia, like some people might have a problem with that and ask you to leave. And that's not even specific to Stacks or Discord. That's just like, if you did it to my face, I'd probably ask you the same thing. But again, no one's stopping you from doing it. It's just you are not entitled to my attention is the thing.
I think that's interesting. The earlier point that you touched on is to more sort of trying to do the resolving the conflict bit and sort of offering people a guide to go about how to doing that. Because I was talking to Juliet earlier this week, and it was almost, in my mind anyway, it was almost, if we had any conflict in the community, step one is actually conflict resolution before the punishment comes. And so it's sort of the step one and the go-to sort of first point of action to try and resolve it. And then whether we get into the punishment, that's up to debate. But at least the first point of action is to attempt to resolve the conflict. And by having some guideline, perhaps might offer people some perspective or some step-by-step guide to go about doing it.
That the code of conduct has it, I think, right, Juliet?
It's the first thing is to talk to people. And this is something we wanted to emphasize a little more, is that conflict resolution issue of really just talking with each other. And there's a protocol to helping people. I mean, if somebody gets in an argument, and there have been situations already in the community where folks have come to me about an issue that occurred, and it left a really bad feeling between people. And even though they figured it out on their own, and it wasn't a problem afterwards, it left there's like that negativity that's left over. And most people on the call would say, well, you just deal with it, suck it up, but I think that being able to have someone come and be a neutral third party and be able to talk with you about it, about what the issue is, and help come to some human resolution between people about it. That's not in this code of conduct. That's something that we've been discussing and working on for a while on the conflict resolution side. But this code of conduct already says the enforcement stuff doesn't happen right away. These are just a set of guidelines to say, if something happens, here's how we're going to handle it. And I think at the point where we are now, we're talking about, are those appropriate guidelines? It doesn't mean that as soon as someone says something out of bounds that they're going to be, banned. That's not what it says. It would have to be pretty egregious for that to happen, I think. What's your take on this?
The code of conduct actually prevents that from happening. Like, the code of conduct ensures that you don't just get the ban hammer right away for something you happen to say and not even know you're in the wrong.
Exactly. Exactly. It doesn't happen right away. And it prevents that kind of power grab too, of someone who just wants to ban people.
Yeah, I see the code of conduct as more of a check on the admins than a check on the users. It stops the admins from being capricious power trippers.
Exactly.
Then maybe it becomes how we communicate what this is really all about. Then yeah, maybe how we deliver that communication to the wider community. Because currently I'm getting a lot of pushback on this is a bad idea. So maybe I need to think about where to emphasize on things.
Yeah, I think education is always a good thing. And so writing out an article on enforcement and what it really means. And really it's a check on, and I think that Jude said it best, it's a check on power grabs by the those folks, the moderators or whoever.
One thing that might be good to include, just given some of the feedback that we see from people in terms of them almost instantly misunderstanding the goal, is right up front kind of stating the limits of what can possibly be governed by this. So saying, hey, this isn't going to limit what could be deployed on the Stacks blockchain. This isn't going to limit certain things from being possible and being discussed in other forums, and it's only covering these particular things. Just because if people feel like, oh, hey, they're setting these rules, regardless of whether they fall within them or not, it almost by definition says certain people are outside of those rules, or at least that's how it could be interpreted, which starts cutting people out. And so I think trying to be upfront about that so that people understand what can even be under the scope of this might help, at least alleviate some of the concerns, because people can kind of go wild with their imagination of, some kind of tyrannical power structure enforced by code of conduct, even if that's not even realistic.
So I might have missed this earlier in the call. I hopped on late, but the Enfor, what you guys are describing is something that likely the Stacks Foundation and probably a bunch of the companies that are public would be ascribing to or putting their names behind. So would this also occur? It's obviously in a way subjective, right? So you could say, hey, this person has just shown awful behavior on Twitter, so then they can't come to an event, they can't receive a grant. Is that my understanding of this? Is that, of course, there's going to be procedures in place. I guess you talk to the person first, you do this, you do that. But the worry is that you can essentially isolate somebody from the rest of the community based upon things they may have said or done in the past that, I think everybody has things they probably wish they could take back, right? So.
That's true.
I don't think that we would want to be hasty with punishments. I think that a mechanism like this is meant to, for the people who are guilty of bad behavior, sometimes I think your reputation is just meant to take a hit, right? Like, I think that we as a community would want to agree that people are capable of reform or making positive changes, but there are consequences, and usually they're social consequences. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to get to the stage where we're like, you're not allowed to apply for a grant, or you're not, but maybe based on like a track record of bad behavior, it would make it harder to be considered for something like that, because you're not trustworthy within the community. I feel like we would start there before actually prescribing punishments that are that intense.
And
again, like the code of conduct makes sure that there's multiple avenues for de-escalation before the punishment comes out.
Yeah. So the person would repeatedly have to do something that the other folks don't like necessarily, right? So, my just quick little example here is there's probably people on the call that think Elon Musk is the worst person ever. If Elon Musk wanted to apply for a grant or do something in the Stacks community, there might be a lot of contention, and I doubt he's going to change his behavior. So, people like that, that is something to think about. Is there's people that have great ideas and great ambitions, but they might also have things that you don't like that they say. So.
Let me try and, I know we had a lot of conversations about this sort of moral side. How about let me switch the question to what makes our Stacks code of conduct unique? What makes it different to another chain's code of conduct? For example, Ethereum or Polkadot. What about on this side of things? Anybody got any thoughts?
You know,
do we-
honestly, and until we started having the conversation around this, I never really even thought of blockchains as having code of conducts really outside of just maybe how they govern conversations on GitHub for code contributions and things like that for specific projects. But I always kind of thought that people are kind of inherently ungovernable in regards to software. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to have all kinds of beliefs that you can't really control. You can't really account for. You can't predict where they could go and evolve over time. So it's really hard to kind of prescribe in an official document how things should be done. But I do also like the idea of seeding proactive ideas, right? So like we should maybe avoid off-topic conversations that are controversial or something like that. That could be something okay versus we will remove you from conversation if you're doing something else that's against what we say in the code of conduct. It's that nuance of like we'll potentially remove you versus this is what we should do. I think that's a big difference.
Jude, did you have any thoughts?
I haven't looked at any of the other blockchain repositories, but I'm pretty sure some of them have codes of conduct, not on the execution of the code though, or on the execution of network actors like miners or stakers or whatever the means of block production are controlled by. But they definitely do for legal entities internally. They have to, it's required by law. Like you can't create a hostile work environment. That's something that, in the United States, at least, that's a legal offense. And same thing goes for like, in-person meetups, again, because you can't just have like a meetup where, people are repeatedly physically harassed, like because harassment itself, regardless how you think about it, is a crime. So these things are coming from a place of like, oh, we just want to make sure everyone adheres to our, delicate aesthetics and sensibilities. That's not what this is about at all. This is just really about, and it's not about, prescribing, certain behaviors as bad or undoable, or even behaviors outside per se. It's a matter of like, we interact with each other, and do those interactions create harm? And if so, here is how we go about reducing that harm and de-escalating it. Like it's not like there's like a checklist that we're holding up and saying, oh, check box A, check box B, check box C, okay, you're banned. Like that's not what this is about at all. This is very much about just making sure that should conflict arise, there is a way to deal with it that doesn't give any individual, that doesn't put us all at the mercy of one or more handful of petty tyrants. Because that's really the alternative. Like without a code of conduct, like projects could, ban people whenever they want. They could hold doxing materials and then whenever they want, because hey, who's going to stop them? There's no social convention.
Then going off that, then that sort of how we come to consensus on, part of like CIP 15, like the voting stuff might be useful.
What's up?
The voting side of thing might become useful then, because that's like, if there was one person who felt this way, then he cannot just like ban somebody unilaterally. There has to be some voting involved or consensus reached before that action can happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like making a court or something like that, where there's options to appeal, or there's ways to decide like who's, the forum by which behaviors that led to conflicts are examined, and people are given a chance to defend themselves. Yeah, like these are all necessary things, because otherwise in the heat of the interaction, someone with the power to ban the person might become so outraged that they just do that, and it turns out that that was an unjust or uncalled for action, and no one wants that. No one wants an unjust or uncalled for action.
Okay, I'm gonna thank you so much. This has been a great conversation today. I didn't really expect this to be so discussed in such great detail, the nuances. And thank you everybody for joining the chat and contributing to this sort of this conversation, because I know it's been discussed, but there's a lot of different opinions. I'd like to highlight everybody's different opinions across the community, because whether we like it or not, personally, is about the greater community, whether they like it or not. I think, and when we come to deciding, we will find out whether the greater community feels that way or not, or despite our personal preferences. But I think making some improvement to it will help to deliver what it's meant to intend for. So with that being said, just to wrap it up, on this call, we talk about many different kind of stuff. We communicate about the big SIPs, we discuss about voting, we discuss about ecosystem DAO stuff. We discuss next week. In fact, we will be talking about non-custodial NFT staking. So a bit of recap on where Set2 is at as well. So yeah, so any ideas, feel free to come to this call, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, Hero.
Thank you guys.